Welcome everybody to this Marco webinar on fractional consulting services. My name is Jonathan Worry, and I'm the Vice President of the Managed Service Business Unit, which encompasses these services that Charles and Don are going to be sharing with you today. I thank you for giving us some of your time in your busy workday. We'll do our best to make it a good use of that time. When I started at Marco back in 1996, this was as customers were putting in their first networks, connecting them to the internet. We were a big Novell shop back in that time. And so we're putting in group-wise email servers. We're putting in a variety of firewalls to protect people from the outside world. And over time, that morphed into Windows servers and Exchange, along with wide area networks as our customers started adding offices. And we're doing all this from one location in St. Cloud, Minnesota, mind you. And then as that morphed, as the access expanded, came increased security risks. And this is 20, 25 years ago. And fast forward to today, where our information is under attack, as we know. And we've got probably each day, our organizations are being targeted. And they want to trick our people. They want access to our information for a variety of, nefarious uses, actually. And so I think of what we've done at Marco to adapt to the changing times. We've gone from this product-based solution, hey, if you buy this product, it will solve this issue, to today we're going to be talking to you about really some product agnostic things and more our services, the talented people we have that you can subscribe to get their knowledge and service. And and you know what? If you want to source the products from us, great. But this is really more around an engagement on an outsourced basis where you can get access to some of our knowledge and our lessons learned and our best practices, because we've been in this for 40 years and without having to insource it. And so we liken this type of service to something, fractional services or outsourced services like marketing or CFO and accounting services or HR and payroll services. Think of this as another module in there. And so you can get access to the knowledge and value you want without maybe having the cost of the internal department or W-2. So that's what we're going to be talking to you about today. Marco we see this as a big part of our future, helping our customers manage their risks and their compliance and protect themselves. And so the presenters you're going to be hearing from today, one came from a customer. Charles has been with us for several years, but Charles Brandt, who's going to be talking to you about security and compliance and some of the offerings we have for that. And then you're going to be hearing from Don Hoverston, who is a senior virtual CxO. He's going to be representing our CIO services. And both of these guys provide leadership and actually consulting. Don joined us after competing with us successfully, I might add, for about 20 years in central Minnesota. And he and his partner sold us their business, and then they joined us. So from competition to collaboration. And so Don's been an important part of this group for the last 6 or 7 years. So Kim, I'm going to pass it back to you. Thanks for letting me kick this off. We got great attendance here today. And thank you everybody for spending some time with us.
Thank you, Jonathan. So as Jonathan mentioned, my name is Kim. So I'll be your host today. And I work with Marco's marketing and sales ops. And then just wanted to remind you some housekeeping items that we have. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop those right into the chat, and we'll try to answer those during the time, or we'll grab those at the end. The session is being recorded, so in case you can't come or you'd like to share this, we will send up a follow-up email with the link. So that usually takes about 2 business days. And then let's introduce the speaker. So Jonathan did a great job, but let's hear from Charles. Charles, give us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for joining this morning, Jonathan. Thanks for that introduction, Kim. Charles Brandt, Consulting Services Manager here at Marco. My team is running assessments, whether it be technology or security, and really offering these VCIO and VCSO services, fractional services that we're going to be going over today. My experience, as Jonathan mentioned, I was actually a customer at Marco as an IT director. I've also been a project manager, a consultant, and a business owner. And really where I live kind of day to day, week to week, is looking at security program development within companies and helping them really understand these things in terms of, yes, certainly the technology that's out there, but also the risk and how these technological innovations and the risks that come along with some of the changes in the landscape can affect business and really when it comes to incident response, how they need to be prepared for that. And we really built a team here that can help them answer those questions and prepare for what's coming. How about you, Don? Can you give us a little bit about your background? I know Jonathan gave a couple highlights, but I know there's much more that goes with that.
I thought he did a great job. But yes, Don Wolverston, Senior Virtual Chief Information Officer here at Marco. I've been in the industry over 30 years. And as Jonathan mentioned, most of that time was actually spent running a very successful IT company before bringing it over to Marco in 2017, the end of 2017. And so really what I bring to our clients is not just a technical background, but also the business background so that I can kind of help bridge that gap between technical teams and executive teams.
Don, that was a great segue for me. So a good lead in to talk about both of those. So we have a poll that we want you guys to do. We're going to go ahead and open that poll right now. So do you feel executive leadership and IT department priorities are aligned in your organization? So if you've never done a poll before, a notice will appear asking you to participate. Choose your answer, hit submit, and then we'll display the results for everyone at the end. So the answers are yes, no, somewhat, and then unsure. So it does look like we are actually getting some poll answers. So thank you for everyone for participating. So we do give you about a minute to answer. So you're on a clock, about 20 seconds left. So thanks for participating in this. Charles, Don, do you think the answers are going to be somewhat? No, yes, have a feeling which way they're going to lean?
I do. From what I've seen, we certainly see that sometimes they aren't fully aligned. But we see a wide variety. Some are more aligned than others.
Correct. So I did show the results. And so it looks like we had yes, 19. So great job. 9, no. Somewhat 29, and then unsure 2. So good mix of group. So the first thing we're going to talk about is here today. So CIO and CISO consulting. So Charles, let's start with the importance of the CIO and CISO roles for an organization. Why are both positions needed in today's landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, Kim. And we'll be kind of answering that throughout this presentation, but kind of a high level. If you're not familiar with that virtual title, that Virtual Chief Information Officer, VCIO, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer, VCISO, they really do help organizations move forward and achieve their goals and their long-term outcomes that they're really driving it as a business. What we're seeing in the market is that companies looking to do IT strategic alignments, making sure that they're moving in the right direction. I know, Don, you'll kind of break down a little bit more in depth what that looks like, but such as periods of high growth or expansion, making sure these things are scalable, for example, really having somebody with the experience necessary to kind of help the organization through that process. VCISO, a little different. Again, we'll spend plenty of time on that today, but really handling those security program development concerns, regulation, compliance, a lot of the frameworks that are out there. And what we're seeing is that companies are going through the process of trying to hire these positions full time, and they're finding that really the market rate for each position is $200,000 plus, and they're going, I do want this experience. We understand the value. We know that we need to bring somebody with this background on to help us move forward, but we don't necessarily need them full time. We don't need to take on that as a full-time role in our organization. We're looking for just a kind of a part-time engagement and a regular occurrence to kind of move us forward. And that's really where that fractional services comes in, aka virtual services, right? And you get the expertise, you get that person that's going to help you kind of bridge the gap between executive leadership and IT, and you don't have to go out and actually hire a full-time position to do that. So
Don, I have a question for you. So the CIO and the CISO roles, both of those need to speak, I'm going to call it tech, right? So that technical side, plus they also need to be able to speak on that high level executive C-suite, different terms. So can you describe the value of the alignment between having an IT and an executive leadership? So why is that so important for organizations?
It's really important because the focus is different. The technical teams tend to have big projects lined out, but when they bring it to the executive team, they tend to focus on features because that's how they're buying it. And so they're really focused on what it can do. And the executive teams are really looking for more about how efficient can it make us? How will this impact our risk profile? How does this impact our revenue? And so while the project might be the right project, there's just a disconnect in explaining why it's so important. And sometimes too, on the executive side, the technical team doesn't know what some of the goals are for the organization. They don't know about some big events that are coming up. And so they're not even thinking about how easy it is to split off part of an organization from a technical perspective, or how easy it would be to bring on an organization. And so they're really just focused. The focus is completely different. And so sometimes it feels like they're speaking two different languages.
Question. Great. So we did say we called this webinar an introduction, right, to Marco's services, but Charles, really, this is not a new service for Marco. So Jonathan alluded to that, but can you tell us a little bit about just the history of Marco and why we're introducing this now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kim. And as you kind of alluded to, Marco has been offering these consulting services, both from a security perspective, obviously that strategic planning perspective, for quite some time. We're a managed service provider offering IT services to over, 500 dedicated companies with regards to those managed packages, thousands of customers with IT projects and rolling out, and obviously print and voice and other services as well. Through that process, we're hitting every vertical out there. We're meeting with companies of all different sizes. We understand the unique challenges that these companies are facing. And through that process, we've really heard a demand for, wanting dedicated resources or a designated individual that can kind of meet with them on a recurring basis. Instead of just looking at things as a reactive point in time engagement, we really wanted to build this out into something that was more of a long-term partnership. Certainly, Marco understands the value of that through our IT managed services, and we're bringing that into the consulting realm now with these VCIO and VCISO services as well. So in short, we're really reacting to the demand that's out there. We see a lot more value in having these longer term engagements. Really gives us a chance to dig in, understand the organization. And Don, I know you're going to speak a little bit about that and just the value that comes out of having that more of a partnership approach.
But John, that's a good segue for you. We're going to dig into that CIO consulting side of the house. So as I say, it is focused around, as I say, IT strategic planning, right? But can you talk to us? I've heard the term fractional seems newer to me, where you hear VCIO or that virtual services. So what is virtual CIO? Are they the same thing? Is it different? So can you tell me a little bit about that? And then I'll let you dig into this typical engagement.
There may be some disagreement in the industry, but I'll give you my version. From my standpoint, virtual CIO would just mean that it's a really broad term, meaning any sort of remotely delivered CIO services. What the industry has kind of moved towards is that it's become. We see a lot of managed services offerings will include these CIO services, and what they are including is really a technical resource that's available to answer technical questions. Certainly value in that. A fractional CIO is maybe a little bit narrower definition, and that is an actual CIO with business and technical experience, and you are getting access to their time, typically not just on demand, but also there's typically some a scheduled cadence, regularly scheduled meetings as well. And so it's actually an extension of your organization. It's somebody that participates on a regular basis. And so not just technical guidance within a certain product stack, but just overall guidance for your organization that goes beyond what the organization is selling and frankly beyond technology, and really connects to the business as well.
Hey. And then as I see, the slide that we have up just really talks through a typical engagement. So do you mind just walking through some of the things that you might see with this CIO consulting?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, it's very customizable, completely customizable. But the way that we often start, we typically will go for a minimum of 12 months. And the way that it would typically start would be, let's do a technical assessment. Let's dive in. Let's run a bunch of scans. Let's collect a lot of information. It helps me as a VCIO. It helps me or a fractional CIO understand the environment. Usually the organizations we work with have a pretty good understanding of what their environment looks like, but maybe they didn't realize, maybe there's some devices that they didn't realize that were out there, or maybe there were some devices like smart TVs that they hadn't even thought of coming up with a strategy for. So we start with that assessment. It gives us a baseline too that we can compare against later on, so we can start showing, so we can show some progress as we go. You do get a designated resource, and so if I'm working with you, I'm the one that will be available to you. We do have a team that helps us with the assessments, but moving forward, you have one designated VCIO resource. I mentioned the recurring team meetings. It can look different. Some organizations maybe want us to meet with their technical team weekly, some monthly, and everything in between. Executive team meetings can be that way too, although that's often a monthly meeting. And then sometimes we bring them together as well. So some sort of regular cadence on team meetings. And then, the goal is to get everybody aligned, get both teams aligned, make sure that that we understand maybe what projects are out there and help prioritize them. We can provide executive reporting. We do provide recommendations, and we modify that to the organization based on what they need. And then technology roadmaps. Okay, we've agreed on what the priorities are. Let's start here, and this will be our first project, and we'll move through the year as we go. So that's really what it looks like. But the technology assessment is really important, I think, for me to understand the organization and to kind of get everything in one place so that we can prioritize from there.
That's a great one. So, Don, as I say, for the technology, it's like the technology assessment and the roadmap sort of go hand in hand, right? Because you have to have that baseline, plus you're looking ahead for like projects or what is coming up for the organization. So, is all of that with these recurring meetings, is that what you're looking at, right? So like sort of the priorities, the roadmaps, coming up with sort of like next steps for that in those cadence, is that what you're doing for the team meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done technology assessments for many years, but what we've heard is that we really appreciate that technology assessment, but we need a little bit more help to figure out, okay, you gave us some good ideas on what we should prioritize, but we want to really talk to you and really fully determine what our priorities are based on our organization. And so we help do that, and then we just help the organizations execute along the way. If there's stumbling blocks, we can help with that. Maybe there's some solution design help that is needed. Maybe there is some design validation that's needed. Whatever it might be, maybe there's we need. We know that you offer products and services to Marco, but we're really looking at a different provider. Can you help us? Or two different providers. Can you help us determine between those two, even though one of them isn't you? Absolutely, we can help with that. We can put together matrices and help with those decisions too. So really, if I was to simplify it, I would say that we're really going to, after we've done the assessment, we're going to help execute on getting the organization to where they want to be. And whether sometimes that's security, sometimes that's redundancy or resiliency, more efficiency. There's a lot of different goals that might come out of that assessment, but we'll help define that and then we'll help execute on it.
Perfect. And that leads into really that IT strategic goal that we mentioned. Talk to us about some of the typical challenges that organizations face where having an experienced CIO is really going to help them.
Yeah, some of it's just sometimes we meet with technical teams and go through an assessment, and what we hear is that we kind of had all those projects on our radar, but man, seeing them all together, maybe we need to prioritize 2 or 3 of them more than what we have been doing. And so sometimes it's just shining a light on what they already know or certain pieces of what they know. Sometimes it is just talking about all the different components in the environment, like smart TVs, for example. Hey, do we have an update policy for smart TVs? Do we have a process for onboarding employees or offboarding? It might be, I've certainly heard this before, everybody's going to the cloud. Do we need to go to the cloud? What does that look like? And just discussions around what does make sense, because the answer is not the same when we start talking about the cloud. The answer is not always yes, everybody should take everything to the cloud. In fact, often it's not everything and it's not nothing. It's usually somewhere in the middle, and we can certainly help with that hybrid discussion too. A lot of other challenges too. Budgets are always a challenge, especially when we've got 2 groups within the organization that might be focused on 2 different things. So we need to kind of bring that together. We can do staff evaluations too. We work with some organizations that have a large team and maybe have had some turnover and they're trying to figure out exactly what they need to hire for. And so we can help basically give them an inventory of what skills they have so that they know what skills they need to hire for. And sometimes the challenge is just, hey, we're trying to get cyber insurance and we need to get ourselves in a place where they will insure us, or we need to get ourselves in a place where it's more affordable. And so we can help with those things too. So lots of different challenges out there that we run into and that we are prepared to help with.
Great. So who is or what organization is generally a good fit for CIO consulting? Can you give us some examples? I know these are some challenges, but do you have any other examples like senior IT leadership turnover? Is that a where a CIO might really help with keeping the organization on a good path?
Absolutely. If there's some turnover, senior leadership turnover, that is a potential. Organizations that are experiencing growth or plan to grow, but don't have a CIO in place and just want to make sure that they've got a strategy to adjust to that. Mergers and acquisitions. I work with quite a few organizations that are going through mergers or acquiring organizations. And so we can certainly help with that. Sometimes we run into organizations that have security concerns. Sometimes it's the opposite. We work with some organizations that say, you know what, we're in a pretty good place from a security perspective, but we don't really have anybody holding our feet to the fire to make sure that we continue on that path. We want to make sure someone's paying attention to what should be next, what should our strategy be, so that because we know that if we just do what we're doing today, that's not going to be good enough in 3 years. And so we need some guidance as to what we should be thinking about. So those are all things that businesses that can use our help, or organizations that can use our help, and types of organizations that we've worked with. And some of it goes back to that question, that full question that you answered. We work with some organizations that just it's not that the executive team and technical teams don't get along. There's just a disconnect in determining what the priorities should be, or explaining why priorities need to be priorities. And so those are things that we can help with too.
Good. As I say, Don, I do have other questions for you, but Charles, we had a really good question come in. So how many virtual CIO and CISOs does Marco staff? And then do you have an approximate, like how many customers do we serve on average? Do we have those numbers from like looking in the past?
Yeah. So we have a team that is offering VCIO and VC. So there's a couple individuals that are going to be a little bit more a mixed background, right? Coming at it from that technology director, CIO, and CISO in their former roles. And really, in the other cases, we have people more dedicated to one or the other, right? Obviously, security is a big part of both, but the CISO role would really have a larger background in compliance and regulation. Hey, they've been through SOC 2 certification, or they've worked a lot with HIPAA or PCI, or whatever your flavor of framework is, right? ISO 27001. So we have a small team of dedicated VCIO and VCSOs that can work with organizations. We really try to pair them up with the right fit too. So I think that's kind of important to note. So we do already have people going through our packaged services across a couple different industries, and they are going through the process of, like, for example, VCSO getting like SOC 2 certification, right? So Marco doesn't, we're not doing the audit certification portion of that, but we're preparing companies to go through that with an outside organization, right? So, you're going to have an attestation body that's going to come in and be that final point. So we really help companies get to the point where they feel confident going into that engagement. Generally, it's expensive, so you want to be sure you're preparing, and that's kind of what our team is put together to do.
Perfect. And then, as I say, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. And then, Don, what are some of the questions that organizations are often asking when we first start working with them? So we meet with them, they're looking at the CIO consulting services. What are some of those like typical questions that they're going to ask or ask you?
Yeah. The first one's pretty simple. Are we okay? That's usually the, like, where are we? How are we doing? What is our security posture? What if we have a disaster? So it kind of starts with just that simple question of, are you okay? And again, that's why we start with the technology assessment, so that we know you are okay, and usually that's the answer. You are okay, but we certainly recommend these things sooner as opposed to later. Every once in a while, we see organizations that are not, but typically not at this level. I kind of brought it up earlier, and we're thinking about moving to the cloud. What do you think? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? Where do we start? And how do we even, can we? And so there's discussions around that. Sometimes there's questions about disaster recovery. And again, it's kind of that same, are we okay? We need to be back up and running in 15 minutes. Are we okay? Or 4 hours or 2 days or whatever that might be. So I think those are some examples. And sometimes it's just, this industry moves so fast. How do we plan? How do we plan as next quarter, next year, a few years down the road? And so those are things that we can help with as well.
Before we move on to Charles, Don, I have one more last question for you. So if you had to give me 3 to 5 benefits that you think would be applicable to the Fractional CIO consulting services, what would those be for an organization?
I think, thought leadership, strategic guidance, I think are some of the biggest ones. You get the benefit of an outsider coming in, but it's an outsider that's learning your business. And so it's not a complete outsider. It's an outsider that really sees a lot and will continue to see more as you go. So you kind of get that benefit of, maybe a third party is a better word than an outsider, but a third party coming in and saying how we should maybe think about prioritizing security, or, maybe we happen to find out in the process that there's an acquisition coming up, and that really changes our upcoming projects or upcoming priorities. Maybe additional resources are needed in the server and storage department, or not needed because of the spinoff. So I think those are a few of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, that's great. And then we did, Charles, I'm going to pivot to you before we do a poll. What are the risks as well as challenges, if any, for Marco providing both the CIO and a CISO services? Can we do that before we hop into the poll? Or maybe that you'll answer the question and I'll launch the poll. How about that? We do that.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely some benefits to having individuals from both the CIO and CISO side. We work with organizations that certainly have CIO representation. They just don't have as much of a background in that security compliance background. So there's certainly some risk to that. Maybe trying to take on more of that security background when that's maybe not something that's generally been in your wheelhouse. And honestly, it could just take a lot of time and resources that maybe could be spent in a different way. Right. So I think it's one of the benefits of having somebody that really has years of experience going through those. They're very familiar with those frameworks. They're very familiar with that certification process. If you're a CIO and you don't have that background, pairing up with a CISO or virtual or fractional or otherwise, a lot of advantage to that. As far as risks associated with having both of these, with Marco, I wouldn't look at it that way. I'd say there's definitely some benefits though.
Good one. And then our poll question was, do you have any compliance requirements to meet for your organization? And I just launched the poll results. It looks like it was all of them. So I was going to say someone answered that way. They're dealing with all of these different ones, plus some others as well. So good information. So Charles, this is the time to pivot to you. So thank you, Don, for talking about CIO. And then Charles, let's talk about CISO. So CISO. So really focused on the IT and security and compliance, right? So tying back to that compliance question. We know that maintaining an optimal cybersecurity strategy is more important and more complicated these days, right? Everything keeps changing. We keep hearing new attack vectors. When we look at the fractional CISO consulting high-level focus, what does that term fractional mean as it relates to CISO and keeping up with today's market and landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of diving a little bit deeper into some of those items that I just kind of mentioned. There's going to be IT infrastructure that's out there in your environment. Obviously, very important. Don mentioned a couple key examples of that. A lot of overlap with security in general. We could all think of some solutions like MFA. We're getting pinged all the time. That's ubiquitous these days, right? But I think when it comes to those fractional CISO services, what we really want to do is get a good, firm understanding of both your current state and really the horizon line. And that is to say, making sure that you're strategically developing your program over time and you really understand the milestones that go into that. Obviously, compliance regulation adds another level of complexity to that. And this individual, whoever on the team working with our different clients, that's really what they're there for, right? So we want to understand these things, not only in terms of the technology that is, to be evaluated, but also really putting it in business terms. Every time we throw out a security control, there's a trade-off there, and helping, the IT department, the security officer, express that in terms that are relatable to leadership. This is really what it's going to do, certainly, but from the terms of risk, here's what we're eliminating or at least reducing, and here's the real world consequences, as you mentioned, Kim, and it never stops, never ending changing threat landscape. If we don't put these things in place, here's some of the fallout that can happen. So really putting together that roadmap and making sure that it's lining up with all these different factors is a pretty foundational step in getting this going.
Yes, absolutely. So, Michelle, we have some typical engagement, some bullet points up on this slide. Do you mind walking us through those? What does a typical engagement look like for CISO consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. And, similar to kind of that typical engagement that Don mentioned from the VCIO side, we also would have a designated VCISO resource in that, again, this is a partnership, 12 months minimum, right? We often see these going longer term, even from the onset. We're looking at these challenges in terms of compliance, often a 2, maybe even 3-year timeline on that, just because there are so many different moving pieces in that process. Not only getting it up and running, but maintaining it over time as well. Very important. So from the onset, we're going to look at those safeguards, those controls, those certainly technical configurations, but also administrative practices. Don mentioned HR onboarding, offboarding, often overlooked from a security standpoint as well. Obviously tooling. We're gonna go through all of these different things and see what you have, what you don't have, and then also compare it to the governance structure. That would be everyone's favorite, right? Documentation, policies, incident response plans. Don was talking about cyber insurance policies earlier. Well, a lot of those are actually calling these documents out as a requirement now. So whether it's that or a particular framework that you're going through, making sure that all of those pieces are on your roadmap. What we've found is doing this manually, trying to track it through Excel sheets and all sorts of stuff like that. Not really the most optimal way. There's a lot of gaps there for things to fall into. So we actually roll all of this into cybersecurity framework and compliance tracking software that we use for all our engagements for that purpose. Can store evidence to kind of prove where you're at with any of those outside bodies that I mentioned earlier. I see on our poll we have SOC 2. I think I even saw somebody from CMMC. So you can have a AICPA coming in as an outside organization or a C3PAO, whatever that outside entity that needs to get eyes on your environment. That centralized repository for all the stuff that you're collecting is very important. It also helps us pull together some really actionable executive reporting. Hey, how are we doing? What can we expect coming up? And how are we putting in that in terms that are maybe a little less technical for folks that aren't kind of spending their day in and out with these acronyms and control frameworks and all that. In real world business terms, what are we going to be expecting? We go over all of these things on our recurring calls. Again, as Don mentioned, it's different for every organization, right? Sometimes we really do dive in for some of the more complicated frameworks on a weekly basis, kind of just making sure that needle is moving continuously towards the goal. Or in other cases, at least with some of the groups, maybe it's a more monthly cadence. We don't need to know all the ins and outs of everything that's going on, but we do want to see those major updates. We want to see where we're succeeding, or maybe where some of those are running into some obstacles, and we need some buy-in from leadership. So typically that's what we see. And again, this is over longer term movement. You don't eat the elephant all in one bite. It's kind of one piece at a time, but doing that strategically so that you are increasing your security posture, decreasing your risk as quickly as possible. Getting that in a prioritized way is really the name of the game.
So, Charles, who is generally a right fit for CISO consulting? I know when we were looking at attendees, we did have a lot of CIOs on here, and I feel like a lot of organizations sometimes will start with that CIO or CTO space and don't have a CISO. So what are some other right fits for the CISO consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're a CIO on the call, I guarantee you've noticed that a lot more questions have been coming up with related to security over the last 5 years. It's just kind of never ending. The compliance frameworks that are out there expanding across different industries. We saw FTC roll out across non-traditional industries like auto, student loans in the last couple of years. So you're starting to get a larger need to have somebody with a security background. I'd say if you are a CIO, that's not your kind of most familiar territory, partnering up with somebody with that background can be a huge value add. I would say in either case, what we generally see being a good fit is, people going through that process of developing their security programs. They need the documentation. They really need to kind of understand how these regulations and the compliance that they're kind of beholden to not only affect their organization, but how they can kind of move through it, help leadership understand really the implications of these things and how to strategically address them. And a lot of the time we see some very, very talented IT staffing in-house to kind of keep a lot of that IT infrastructure up and going. You got your servers, your virtualized servers these days, all this kind of thing. But securing that really is a different skill set. Now, if you happen to have those folks that are good at both, that's fantastic. I applaud your hiring practices, but more often than not, what we are seeing is that maybe some of that security background is missing from those current staffing models, and we really try to kind of supplement that.
Yeah, that's great. So Charles, let's go on to challenges around that we see with the CISO. So can you review some of the typical challenges organizations face where having an experienced CISO would actually really help for CISO?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first, kind of moving down the list would be, that insurance and vendor questionnaires. Nobody's coming to me and say, hey, I filled out my insurance renewal this year and it was much shorter than last year, and they got it to be cheaper and they gave me more coverage. That's just not happening, right? So my background with that goes back about 7-8 years. That time it was, pretty much a single page piece of paper, and your policy amount was staggering. It's just not the case anymore. The things that they're adding onto these questionnaires are growing every single year, getting to the point now where organizations are kind of going, I'm gonna need some outside help just to answer these, and honestly might need some to evaluate some services and how we're going to roll this out. Alternately, we are seeing, and I did see SOC 2 on here as well on that poll, vendor questionnaires, right? Due diligence. Companies are really starting to fall into this, and rightly so, with all the supply chain attacks that are out there. So a lot more questions being asked business to business, and really making sure that you have a program, a security program that's aligned and going to be what really needs to be seen on those questionnaire answers is important. Also, policy development. There's a lot of really good, strong companies out there that just don't have anything documented. There's maybe not as many policies in place, can cause liabilities for companies, as well as just causing some continuity issues if you do have turnover. So along with that, we would see, as I mentioned, incident response plans, disaster recovery plans, business continuity planning. How do you do these things when you maybe haven't gone through that process of business impact analysis? Do you know what your core business processes are? Let's dive into that. It's not just technological or configurations, right? It's really looking at that business process first and understanding the risk associated with any one of those kind of key components going down. So we'll look at all of those as a typical engagement. We have calls that are meet on a regular cadence, and we can kind of prioritize that. Again, you can see how this goes a little bit longer term, right? Also, attacks on executives, financial department folks. If you have any internal software development, very prevalent, some different security concerns there. So we'll go through some kind of more focused training, or even things like tabletop exercises. Hey, we have systems in place, we have solutions in place, we have documentation, but have you tested it, right? Have you started to kind of walk through what that looks like in reality? Does it kind of work the way you thought it would? What I often see is, the IT folks and the executive leadership not always aligned, and just kind of what that means for business continuity. If you have a system that's going to take, a day or two to get back online with your current processes and systems, and leadership thinks it's going to be 4 hours, that's a really costly place to be in potentially. And we want to kind of address those types of things as well. So a couple of challenges. Also, another way of saying opportunity, right? I mean, we really do see these as an opportunity for great conversation and really moving the program forward.
The last question for you, Charles. So what are the benefits? Can you give me that 3 to 5, just like I asked Don, of having a fractional CISO consulting with the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first and foremost, when we talk about enhanced security, it's really increasing your security posture, your ability to proactively handle those situations that we read about in the headlines every day before they happen. If and when that unfortunate day does come, that you're dealing with, an incident or whatever flavor that takes, how are you able to detect it, respond, recover, contain it as quickly as possible, to make sure the impact of that is not getting out of control and ultimately having a real operational or financial effect on your business. It's first and foremost in the minds of all the CISOs on the team, and certainly as they're working with IT leadership and executive leadership, bringing those things up in conversation. So increasing security posture and in the same turn, decreasing risk. I would say, the other one is, again, having access to that high level expertise. These are individuals that, they're very familiar with the industry's frameworks, processes for moving these things forward efficiently. Otherwise it can just be a bit of a struggle for companies that have kind of tried to do everything on their own. We have seen these partnerships move people's programs forward in very short order, handling some very high-risk vulnerabilities quickly. And honestly, with the fractional services, the way that they're set up, it's a lot more affordable. If you're going out, as we mentioned kind of at the beginning of this, hiring these positions out at a market rate for a full-time position, it's just not doable. It's not in the range of most small to medium-sized businesses. So kind of the way we have this structured is meeting that demand for access to talented individuals at an affordable price.
We do have one last poll that we want you guys to do, and I'll go ahead and open that right now. Speaking of insurance and vendor questionnaires, have you seen major increases in cyber insurance requirements this last year? And so Don and Charles both alluded to the fact that the form is probably not any shorter. It's probably more complicated, more things to do, more things to report on, and report back to the insurance. So you go ahead and answer that question for us. And then after the poll, we're actually going to put you guys side by side. So we've heard from both of you, the CIO, and we've heard from the CISO side of the house. So let's actually look at those and look to do a comparison between both of you. So it looks like we have great answers. So someone did say no, which is good. We like that. Good for those organizations. We'll wait a couple more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and just close that poll, and then we'll show everybody. All right, let's show those results. So looks like we had yes 15, no 10, unsure, and we do have some people that don't have a cyber insurance policy. All right, so we have a comparison, right? The CIO and the CISO. So Charles, given this high-level overview of the partnership, we know it's a 12-month engagement, custom packages. Can you talk us through what is for the CISO side of the house? Why do we want to really have that sort of 12-month engagement where we talk about it, set the baseline? Why is that important? Why is that important for the partnership and then for the organization and Marco both?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, kind of to Don's point earlier, we really want to know the business first. We want to understand the goals and the priorities of the company. We want to make sure that the security program is lining up with that. It really does have to come down to that, and to understand in a way that we really feel is appropriate, especially when it comes to compliance and regulation, that longer term program is just necessary. So, what we have up here, as Don mentioned, our programs are customizable both on the VCIO and the VCSO side. These are just some maybe typical engagements that we would see, some examples of how we see companies utilizing these services, kind of like a monthly recurring package, and moving year into the next too. So I think what we're looking at here, again, from the VCSO side, and then I'll take a step back, and Don, you can kind of walk through that VCIO side, is having that designated resource, right? Jumping on, say, a weekly call. We mentioned the software that's kind of doing that tracking to make sure that you're lining up with those frameworks, both the ones that are really instrumental for your business now and also in the future. You can use this software to kind of see, hey, if we decide to go down this route, how far down that road are we already with our current practices, from a business development perspective. That's really an important answer to know. So we value it for that reason too. We're going to be looking at that framework review. It's going to vary, I guess, based off the poll results. We have people kind of coming from all over the place, whether it's NIST CSF, NIST 800-53, ISO 27001, a lot of numbers and acronyms out there. But, whatever it is that your business falls under, we want to make sure that that's how we're looking at it. For a lot of our clients, we're doing a vulnerability scan, for example, maybe a couple times a year or quarterly, once a year. A lot of the times they even have vulnerability scanning in place, but they just kind of want an outside check to make sure there's no gaps. Obviously, the goal here is to make sure that all of these things are lining up. Your vulnerabilities, your frameworks, your business objectives, your security program. Are these all logically broken out into a roadmap that you're going to be able to kind of fulfill on in a way that meets those requirements that you're beholden to? And obviously bringing in executive leadership along the way, giving them updates on that quarterly reporting, for example, in our breakout here. We do this more, less frequent, depending on the company and where they're at. And, outside of our packages, we do actually offer consulting service hours for those engaged in these packages. Hey, we had this thing come up. We weren't expecting it. It's not going to, it's going to go well above and beyond our weekly, but we offer a break on those additional hours as well, which is a huge value add for the consulting service packages as well. So I'd say VCSO side, that's kind of in line with what we would typically see. Don, how about from the VCIO side?
Yeah, similar to what we talked about before. Starts with that assessment, dedicated resource. We set up a good meeting cadence, and I think I think bringing up the additional hours is a good point too, because it's not uncommon for an organization to start with VCIO services, and then as we achieve goals, as we move along and move forward, then that's great. We feel good about where we're at. We would like to maybe focus a little bit more on security. And so then whether that means just a point in time security assessment, or maybe it means, hey, thanks for everything you did. We're ready now to move to the next level and go to VCSO services. There's a lot of different ways that can go, but that's kind of how I look at it. The technology assessments and the VCIO services are a good place to start. The VCSO services are going to be a little bit more focused. Some organizations are going to want both. Some are going to want to start with one and move into the other. And so there is overlap, but yet the VCSO services are certainly going to be a little bit more focused than the VCA, and the VCIO services are going to be a bit more general.
That's great. And Don, thanks for answering that question. Could they have both? And the answer is yes. It could be an organization that needs both of those from Marco. All right. So I was going to say we're wrapping up at the end, but this is the question that everybody wants to ask and no one's asking. So I'm going to ask for them. You ready? All right. What is the price for the consulting services? Can you give us a range? Help us out.
Yeah, I could think kind of based on our typical engagement, right, would be where I'd probably answer. So we land somewhere generally into like a $3,000 to $6,000 a month kind of range typically. Obviously, as we both Don and I have mentioned, this is really dependent on your business, your organization, what you're trying to achieve. If you're kind of just starting out, you're going through maybe just that foundational steps, maybe you'll be below that. If you're going through some more complex multi-year compliance framework engagements, it's going to be on the higher end of that. So, there's probably not one size fits all, but we really try to tailor this to make sure that we're meeting your business needs and in a way that you can kind of plan out for. I think, being a former IT director, having an understanding of what that's going to look like for an annual spend, super helpful. We roll these out for monthly payment too. So kind of breaks that up over the course of the year. So.
And Don, we did get a question. So, what question should companies be asking of a provider when evaluating fractional services from Marco? So, can you give us some things that they should be contemplating?
Well, I mean, kind of going back to that ACIO versus fractional CIO, and it depends on what the organization is looking for, but do you have business experience, or is this just technical guidance? That is a pretty big question, and certainly significantly impacts the price. And then on the other hand, too, we've seen some VCIO roles that are maybe business focused, but not as much technical background. So you can flip that around and check on the technical side of things too, and then. Just examples probably of how they how the provider or organization has aligned technical teams with executive teams, right? And of course I would say that we've been doing this for many years with our technology assessments and our security assessments. So, and I think it's important. I think it's important to have that experience. And you've done it so many times. And I think that's really what brings a huge value. Technical advice is certainly of value too, but when we tie it to an organization's needs, I think that's a really big differentiator. And then the other part is that's maybe sometimes a little bit difficult to talk about, but will our technical team work with this person? Sometimes our technical people are really, really good, but I don't know if quirky is a way to describe them, or sometimes very possessive of their environment. You have to be careful. And so we try very hard to make sure that the technical team knows, hey, look, this is your environment. We understand that. We've got some ideas for you, but you need to evaluate that. Will this team or person work well with our technical team? Because if they're going to come in and tell them this is how it needs to be, and you're wrong about this and you're wrong about that, that might work in some organizations and not in others. So some thought needs to go into can our technical team communicate with this person, and can our executive team communicate with this person? So I think those are some things that need to be considered when evaluating services like this.
We have 1 minute left. So Charles, we did have a lot more questions, so we're going to take those offline and we'll reach back out to you and maybe help get those answered for you. So thank you for engaging. So Charles, if you don't want to just wrap this up, and we'll end our session.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Jonathan, for joining, and Don and Kim and everybody on the call today. As Kim mentioned, we'll be sure to wrap up here, but follow up with any questions you have. If you are kind of working with Marco currently and you're curious about these services, you want to dive a little deeper, by all means, you can reach out to your technology advisor. Don and I both have our email addresses up here. You're certainly welcome to reach out to either one of us directly, whether you're working with Marco today or not. I think really the thing is we like to have conversations and understand you and your business and kind of where you're going. Sometimes that's the right fit. And when it is, we like to let you know how we can help you along on that path. So again, thank you everyone for your time today. We hope this was helpful, and look forward to talking to some of you in the future.